Enjoy all your favorite sports like never before at BetMGM. Sign up using code JERSEY and receive up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win your first bet. When you register with BetMGM, you'll get instant access to a variety of parlay selection features, live betting options, player props, and daily boosted odds specials. And with BetMGM at your fingertips, every play and every game matter more than ever. Find out why BetMGM is the king of sportsbooks. Sign up today with bonus code JERSEY and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win your first bet. BetMGM and GameSense remind you to play responsibly and offer resources to help you make appropriate choices. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. New Jersey only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. First online real money wager only. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets. Bonus bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here for our preview for the Sweet 16 matchup with Kansas State on Thursday afternoon, or evening I should say. Before we begin, I just want to send a quick word of thanks to all of the supporters we have on Patreon, namely in the McTean Cleaves, Brian O'Donnell, Chad Hickey, and in the Draymond Green level, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, Doug Robinson, James Benton, Jim L., Michael Bosnick, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, and all of the ones who are members in the Scott Skiles level. You can go to Patreon to give a monthly support for the show. We really appreciate it. It helps keep the lights on here. It helps us keep going. You can do that by going to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. There will give you options for signing up through Patreon for a monthly basis. You also can go and do one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo. And we have Michael McNicholas, who sent us a gift this month and said, "Sorry, but I don't want to tell too many people about this pod because I want to impress my friends and family." Thanks, Michael. It's pretty funny. That is part of the show. You know, you're going to know more about Michigan State basketball than your friends, but we still think, it'd be nice for you to share. If you're not a subscriber to the show, make sure on your podcast player, subscribe. If you're finding our show through other means, like through Twitter or the internet, just go to a podcast player that you might use and hit subscribe. And that way you don't miss any shows. And also, please share with your friends and other Spartan fans. That helps build the community, makes it bigger, makes it more likely for other people to stumble on the show, and more of us can be better informed about the Spartans and not have dumb Twitter takes that you find so often out there in the periphery. Before I go on to another great way to support the show.
Isn't a good time for those people, by the way.
Yeah,
I know they don't want to be held accountable, but the beauty of the internet is that it never forgets. Remember that.
It's not like Vegas. What happens on Twitter stays on Twitter forever. The bulletin boards or whatever. Another great way to support the show is you can buy our merchandise. So we had a t-shirt drive last fall, winter, I guess. You can go and get our hoodies or our t-shirts printed by Nudge Printing. Super high quality, very comfortable. They're, screen printed just like what Nudge does. You can go and find that by going to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/merchandise. The great thing about that, all the proceeds to that go towards our show. And as an added bonus, it is entirely possible that our shirts, and you don't even know this, Rod, our shirts have superpowers because my wife has worn our t-shirt just twice for the USC game. And now also she decided to wear it Sunday for the Marquette game.
You know what's happening Thursday evening, man.
She came home today. She said, "Just so you know, I have to do laundry tonight because I have to be able to wear that shirt Thursday."
Well, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that because she's washing it. That could break the streak.
Well, she washed it in between. She is a woman, so she doesn't she doesn't wear dirty shirts,
Fair enough. So we're not down to that. Okay.
No, it's not like you take your underwear and you wear it forwards and backwards and inside and outside. You can wear it 4 days.
Yeah.
No,
hey, so I have an idea, and I'm going to make a promise right now. I haven't even talked about this with you, Eric.
Okay.
If Michigan State gets through this next weekend unscathed, I am promising that we will have a piece of merchandise, a T-shirt on sale that reads, "The Final Four is on the schedule." We've gotten to say that once in the lifetime of this podcast. We were doing this, obviously, our longtime listeners will remember. We started in 16, I think. Yeah. We started with
Sam
the 16-17 season. Right. And the 2019 Final Four, we were, we had changed the name temporarily. And we will gladly do that again come Saturday if things break the right way.
Oh, I love that. And, as listeners know, I, of course, won a trip to the Final Four by hitting free throws at halftime. And I was thinking, boy, it would be just great if Michigan State was there. But what are the chances of that? Because this team looked like we all saw the components. We saw the makings of a potential there, but we hadn't seen it come together to where you could feel confident that it was going to happen, that they were going to look competent.
What gave you the reason for hope is something that I've been saying all year long, which is you can say that Michigan State has been plagued by inconsistency, and of course you would be correct, but you could also say that about pretty much everybody else in the country too. And so that was always going to be part of the equation, which was, okay, does your team find a level of consistency at the right time?
Yeah.
And over the first weekend, at least, that's what we saw. We saw Michigan State getting back to some program basics and doing it in a way they really haven't done for much of this season. And that's been enough to get them through. So it was not a safe bet. I don't think either of us are going to stand here. We were not proclaiming from the rooftops, this is a Final Four team. But I think we said, look, do they have a chance? Yeah, because I think a lot of teams have a chance. And I think that's exactly what we've seen. If you look around, we're just to the Sweet 16 level. 2 of the 4 1 seeds are already out. And both Houston and Alabama, particularly Houston, got tested in the round of 32. They fought through in a tough situation, basically having to play a road game, which was absurd. But, I'm not surprised. Let's put it that way. I am not surprised at all with what we are seeing in this tournament. And that extends to Michigan State too. In a year with so much parity, real parity, not the kind of parity people talk about all the time. It's real this year. The differences between teams are minuscule when you're talking about the totality of what they are. And so when you have that, this is what you're going to get in terms of result. It's really wide open.
And finally, before we begin, just a brief update on our bracket challenge for TIF Nuts. Things have moved around a lot. I don't know if you've checked, Rod, but right now you are in 25th place. And
out of how many?
145 or so.
I'm in 25th.
Yeah,
That's
you've rocked out. I would like to point out your champion is out. So I don't know
which was my champion was out in the first round. It was Arizona, but I've still got 2 of my 4 Final Four picks alive. The problem is one of them is Tennessee.
Yeah,
so
right.
I'm going to be rooting very hard against myself, hopefully, come Saturday.
And you're tied with my son and my wife. They're both also in 25th place. I'm coming in at 74th. I'm at 74th place. So I've faded quickly. My Drake has really hurt me. And my Duke Kentucky Elite 8 matchup did not come to fruition, thankfully. So I'm more than happy to be the case.
The East bracket is the one, the East Regional is the one that I'm really pleased by, because I know I talked about it.
Mhm.
Every single talking head and media person I saw had Duke versus Marquette in the Elite Eight game in the East region, and they're both bounced in the second round. And again, I've made a lot of mistakes in picking this thing. Obviously, I'm not in first, but I called that one easily. And one of the reasons I called it and felt so confident in it was they were the two picks du jour in large part because they'd both been riding hot streaks for a while. They both came into the tournament having won like 9 or 10 games in a row. This season, death. It's panned out that way.
Next would be Bracket Dom. Dom was the bracketologist we had, who, since and I don't know if we've mentioned it, but since we've had him on the show, he's now no longer the number 2 bracketologist in the world. He's number 1.
We got in early.
So we got our foot in the door. So he's 89th. And then Gabe.
I feel even better.
Gabe from Nudge Printing is 131st, so he's struggling, but he's got Michigan State as a champion, so he has, I think, potential to move up quite a bit.
Yeah, that would move him way up.
And then
Gabe wins it.
And then, I hope so, if that's what it takes. And then in last place is Kurt from Brothers That Just Do Gutter. So Kurt he's
literally last in the entire thing.
Well, he's ahead of the 3 people who didn't actually fill out the brackets that just had entered.
Well, I feel a lot better about myself now. I will admit I haven't been. I mean, I remember who I picked generally.
Yeah.
But I hadn't been monitoring where I was. So I'm hearing this for the first time. So I'm feeling much better about my prognostication ability. I don't need to win it to feel good.
Right.
That's almost a sign that you don't know enough. Right. but I'll take a path and feel okay.
Well, and my son reminds me after every round, where he is in relation to me. And so the fact that he was behind me and now he's ahead of me, he's quick to point that out to me.
I am really irritated. The last game last night, I lost what would have been my 3rd Final Four. I had TCU winning that regional, and they really had a shot against Gonzaga. They just couldn't get it done late. That was an example of, I think, pedigree of a program and having guys that go through this playing high level games year after year after year versus a program that's not as used to doing it. I think that really showed up. So that was one that had me crying, but because it would have been great. And I don't think many people picked TCU. I mean, they were a 6 seed, but I was confident in them, and boy, they almost made me look smart.
Yeah. Well, it's like just with Drake. They looked really like a great pick, and then they just failed the last 3 minutes of that game against Miami.
I picked them with their first round game. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wishing they would have won that. They might have had a shot.
Maybe. And then finally, so for me, it's actually, we've come to the point now in our family where we're cheering against all Texas teams, not because we have anything against the state of Texas, but we want to make it easy to get tickets if we have to get tickets to the Final Four. So TCU right now is actually good. So we just need Texas and Houston to get bounced, and then we're all set for hopefully getting some easy tickets to Houston.
The good news there is, both of them aren't getting through.
That's
right?
True.
They're in the same region. They're the 1 and the 2 in that region, correct?
No, they're not. I think UCLA is with Houston, and I think Texas is with.
Are you sure?
Am I sure? No, I think that's the case.
I could swear they were 1 and 2 in the same region. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well,
I'm not looking at it.
I'll look at it real quick now that we've got it.
So I thought they were on a collision course.
Oh, you're right. They are. They're both in the Midwest. Yeah, strangely, they're both in the Midwest. You're right. So,
all right. So you really only got a shot for one survivor.
But that means more likely that one's going to make it too, in some ways.
It does, but we've still got
Xavier to come
Thursday,
big.
Friday games. That's right, and they're my pick to win that region. So
yeah. All right.
Let's hope they do it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Kansas State. The Kansas State Wildcats. Michigan State will face on Thursday night in the Sweet 16. It's the first game on the docket at, I think, 6:30 Eastern. They're led by first-year head coach Jerome Tang, or is it Jeremy? Is it Jerome Tang?
Jerome.
I think. Yep. Yeah. Longtime assistant to Scott Drew, who was at Baylor before taking over at Manhattan for Kansas State. The Wildcats are 25-9 overall. They're 11-7 in the Big 12, which is arguably the best conference in the country, certainly by the seeding. That's the metrics show that. This is their first time. They've reached the Sweet 16 by beating Montana State by 12. They beat Kentucky in the round of 32 by 6. They're 47th in offensive efficiency and 17th in defensive efficiency. On offense, they're not a very good team shooting from three. They're only at 33.6%, which is 195th nationally, but 70th in two-point percentage. They have a problem hanging onto the ball. They're 285th in turnover percentage, so that's a real problem for them. But they do get a lot of free throw attempts. They're number 48, and they hit at 75% when they're at the line. Rebounding from an offense standpoint, they're okay. They're 116th. Defensively, they're really good in general. They're middle of the pack in number 3s. They give up, but they are good with percent against at 15th, which is probably a reflection of sort of the type of players they have in athletes. They're number 52 in turnovers forced, 57th in steals, and they're 128th against twos. And the one thing they're really bad at, which seems to be a trend as far as Michigan State teams are going up against, is they're a very bad defensive rebounding team where they're 240th. They also play fast. They're 44th in offensive tempo this year. So they do like to run and get out and move. Michigan State is in the 300s, I think, as far as their tempo. Michigan State's transition defense obviously will be important. And then I guess in general, this new coach, this is after he's taking over for Bruce Weber, who was fired. He was a former coach at Illinois as well, and now he's BTN set. They're long, they're strong, they're athletic, and so they play again. That's probably explains a little bit why they allow a lot of threes, but they probably don't have a high percentage made against them. Probably because they can get out on the shooters a little bit faster than the shooters maybe are used to, and is my guess. Just sort of in general. But they did beat Kentucky, which looked like they're in a collision course with Michigan State after that. But, of course, it doesn't happen. And Duke got wiped out in that region as well. So it's a very strange region. You've got Florida Atlantic, Tennessee, Michigan State, Michigan State and Kansas State. I don't think there are probably a whole lot of people who had those four in their Sweet 16.
I just talked about it. Everybody and their brother had Duke and Marquette, both bye-bye in the second round. Purdue going out in the first round, obviously the 1 seed, a total shocker. But then again, it's not, you do have the 3 in Kansas State and the 4 in Tennessee still surviving. And then you have Michigan State as a 7, which by seed is a surprise, but come on. It's Michigan State. Florida Atlantic would be the surprise, but again, I'm going to bet that they're probably on a decent number of brackets for 2 reasons. One, the main reason is because I think there was so little confidence in Purdue as the 1 seed. The flip side to that is I think a lot of people figured Memphis would be the team to take them out. Instead, Florida Atlantic beat Memphis. So Memphis wouldn't have even gotten to Purdue, even if Purdue had beaten FDU. But I think there are people that will claim that FDU kind of got the shaft by only getting, I can't remember whether they were the 8 or the 9.
They were the 9.
They were the
FDU
9. Yeah. I mean, this is a team that's won, I think it's 33 games now. And granted, it's Conference USA, so people discount that, but that team is pretty legit. So you're right. It's certainly not the 4 teams in Madison Square Garden that were expected by media, especially in a region where you have Duke as a 5 and Kentucky as a 6. People are going to gravitate to those names, and again, Purdue as a 1 would not have been, even though people were suspect, or they were suspect, and a lot of people were suspicious of what they would do. It wouldn't have been a shocker totally to see them come through and get to the Sweet 16 either. But it's ended up not being any of those teams. Instead, it's these other teams. I would say about, the other half, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I actually picked Tennessee to win this region, which seemed to be way off the board. Even though they're a 4 seed, you have to remember that's based in large part upon what they actually did during the season. They're not the same team now because their point guard is out for the year, Ziegler.
Yeah.
That's a big loss. But I still had faith that Tennessee had enough. I picked them to beat Duke. I figured they would do that. And the reason I picked them is what they've shown. They are still a very big, very physical team that can absolutely lock you up defensively. None of that changed. Offensively, they're in a rougher spot. But the things that are really the key to that team are still largely intact in my view. And I will say this just before I turn back to Kansas State specifically. If Michigan State is to win this regional, I'm going to assume Tennessee beats Florida Atlantic. That Florida Atlantic winning wouldn't be a total shock. And Tennessee's the favorite. If Michigan State is fortunate enough to play both Kansas State and Tennessee, these are going to be two old-time physical wars. Like you're going to feel like you just stepped into a time machine and went back to 2000 because it's going to be that kind of basketball. So turning back to Kansas State, you have to give Jerome Tang a ton of credit, a ton, because he took over a team that I believe only returned two guys when all the dust settled. Weber got fired. They had a lot of guys transfer out, including one of those guards that led Miami to their win over IU yesterday. They lost a bunch of other guys. So he had to assemble a roster fast. Now, the portal makes that a different proposition than it even was 3 years ago. If he'd been in this spot pre-COVID, no chance Kansas State is here. Zero, no shot. But because we are in a different era, he was able to go out and get some guys. Now, to his credit, other than Keyontae Johnson, none of the guys he brought in were particularly super high profile players. He didn't do what, say, Underwood did, where he goes out and he gets high profile transfers in the portal, right? He got a couple of stars, supposedly. That's not really what Jerome Tang did. He got one guy that people thought would be very good if he could play. Remember, Keyontae Johnson had the cardiac incident with Florida a couple of years ago.
Oh, right.
People weren't sure he would ever come back. Everybody understood if he's healthy, he's a big time talent. But is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be the same guy he was before? Those were all open questions. So even with him, that wasn't a slam dunk. And then the rest of it was assembling pieces. So he on the fly put together this team that has had a great season. So credit to him. He was part of, for a long time, assistant with Scott Drew. He was a big part of building that program into what it's become, which is a perennial contender now in the Big 12. You start every year at this point assuming that Baylor is going to be somewhere in that mix. Well, Jerome Tang was a big part of that. So it's not a surprise that he's been able to have success. I think to do it this quickly was surprising. They were picked dead last in the Big 12. And here they are in the Sweet 16, and it should be really that surprising based on what they were in the regular season. They were a 3 seed.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you can look at that and say, right, they're expected to be here. But he's done a great job on that front. It is very much diametrically opposed to the way Tom Izzo's team has been built. They are very, very differently assembled rosters, clearly. And so we'll get back to that when we get to the keys. Does that play into anything in the end? Well, we'll find out on Thursday. Stylistically, they are a very different team than what we just saw in Marquette. They play very fast, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And they are in attack mode all the time. This is a team that is going to force itself upon you. And sometimes that works out very well for them. They're solidly in the top 100 from twos. They draw a lot of fouls and they shoot free throws reasonably well when they get there. So those are all positives. The negatives are their turnover numbers are horrific. And so Marquette was a team that came into that game with outstanding turnover numbers, and Michigan State actually, some of them were self-inflicted wounds, but Michigan State made a lot of those plays defensively. It was unusual in that respect, and I think a lot of it had to do with the way MSU got into the scouting report. Kansas State will self-inflict wounds a lot.
We've been used to that in East Lansing.
Absolutely. They're not I don't want to say they're a standard issue Tom Izzo team, because there's certain elements of it they don't do. Like, they're not a great offensive rebounding team. But in some ways, the athleticism, the attacking mindset, and some of the mistakes that go with that are a little bit reminiscent of some other teams has had in the past. I would say this Kansas State too offensively. And you might have seen this. I would imagine a fair amount of our listeners probably saw the game against Kentucky because it was on in the window right before MSU's game, and it was the only game that was airing. This is a team that goes for the home run a lot. And against Kentucky, they were connecting a lot on those home runs. Do not think that they do with regularity. I would describe Kansas State, and I felt this way having seen them in the regular season. I saw them beat Kansas, and they beat Kansas by getting a lead and then barely holding on through some horrible decisions late in that game that kept Kansas afloat. And that is what I thought of when I saw Kansas State in this bracket. Said there's some real physical talent. They got some gamers. I mean, they play hard. They keep coming at you. They are tough. All those things are true, but they are not a smart basketball team. They just aren't. They will make poor decisions trying to hit home runs. You have not seen a team this year, I guarantee you, that will attempt more behind the back passes, spectacular plays. That's what I mean when I say they go for the home run. They try, and you saw in the Kentucky game, they pulled most of those off. That's no guarantee it'll happen the same way against Michigan State. In fact, I would bet that it's at that same rate. So that's a problem for them. They can big play themselves right out of a game. But Michigan State is going to have to deal with the aggression that Kansas State brings to the game. That's the word I would use with them. They are aggressive for good and for bad. Defensively, they're better. You mentioned they're middling in terms of giving up 3-point attempts, but they're outstanding in terms of the percentage against. And when you get to this point in the season, I start to put a little more faith in that number. That's a notoriously luck-driven number to some extent. But when you're that good at it and you've done it over this long a period of time, I ascribe at least some of those results to what you're actually doing defensively. I don't think it's all luck. So I think they're good there, which, again, Michigan State's playing another team that's got the capability to hold threes down and is probably going to look to emphasize it. They're not as good against twos, but they're okay there. The one big weakness that stands, they force turnovers decently. Again, they're aggressive. Top 60 in terms of turnovers and in steals. So again, it's not just the misfortune of opponents. They're actually creating a lot of those turnovers.
Right.
But that one weakness, defensive rebounding, stands out like a sore thumb. And what's weird about it is two things. Normally, when I see that, I'm assuming that either you're just talking about a small team, or you might be talking about a team that really emphasizes shot blocks. And like we talked about with USC, that was a problem. USC had really good rim protection numbers, but they also gave up a lot of putbacks, second chances. And it's in part, I think, because their defenders take chances and take themselves out of the play where they're trying to block a shot. That's not really Kansas State. They don't have good shot block numbers. And while they start a smaller team, most of their bench is big. So it ends up that they play a decent amount of size. Not a problem either. I haven't really worked out why it's such a problem for them, but it's a problem. I mean, they are bad as a defensive rebounding team. So that's a potential Achilles heel that Michigan State can look to exploit as well.
All right, well, let's talk about the starters, brought to you by the brothers that just do gutters. So Kurt is clearly, he's proven he's not very good at picking his bracket, but he's really good at doing gutters. So this is a company that just specializes in doing gutters, doing fantastic work. It is springtime, rain is coming, and the snow will, I promise, turn to rain, and we're going to have all kinds of problems if you don't have that taken care of. So if you live on the west side of the state, the Grand Rapids area, be sure you get a hold of Kurt Stauffer and his team at the brothers that just do gutters. They can clean them out. They can put leaf guards on them. They can repair them. They can replace them. They got a huge selection. They work quickly. They're very professional. They work in any weather, and they'll get it done like you wouldn't believe. It's in pretty much any weather. Again, they're really fast, and they're going to do fantastic work. You won't regret it. So you can contact Kurt at his email at kurt.stauffer@brothersgutters.com. The link for that will be found below. You get 10% off if you mention Final Four as you get a hold of him to get the work done. All right, so we'll begin with the starters. The first one is Marquis Nowell, a 5'8" senior, started his career at Arkansas Little Rock. I'm sure that's probably because he's just so small that probably no one trusted him.
I think you're probably right.
He averages 17.1 points a game on 39, 35, and 89 shooting. He gets to the line a ton, averaging 6 free throw attempts a game, averages 7.8 assists per game, but he has a lot of turnovers as well, so he's just barely above a 2-to-1 assist to turnover mark. And he looked really good, and he was really kind of took over that game at the end of the Kentucky-Kansas State game where he was just dynamic and hitting free throws, and just he's just really good.
Look, he's been a very productive player for them, and he's one of the few holdovers they had, and that's probably got a lot to do with why they've been successful despite the heavy roster turnover. Is if you're going to pick a spot to have a guy coming back, point guard's a pretty good place to start. Now, granted, that was for a different coach, but still, you'd rather have a guy who's comfortable, knows the surroundings, all of that as your leader. And he's been really, really good. There's no two ways about it. But I would say everywhere you look, the scoring, the assists, he leads them in steals, almost 2.5 a game. The word that comes to mind is dynamic. He makes things happen. But there's a big but here. If you only watch the Kentucky game, it's the only time you've seen Kansas State, you would think, oh, this guy's maybe the best point guard in America.
Yeah.
Because everything he did went right, especially late. That is not the full story. You mentioned his turnover numbers. They are high. Now, he averages almost 8 assists a game, so that still means he's making things happen. But it also means he's averaging a little over 3.5 turnovers a game. He's making mistakes. His shooting numbers, if you saw him hitting all those threes against Kentucky late in that game, you'd be excused for thinking, oh, this guy is just a stone cold killer. Not the case. 35% from three. He's got shot selection issues at times. He's the primary guy. Now, their whole team does it to one extent or another, but he's the main guy that I was referring to when I was talking about looking to make the home run. Mm-hmm. He has a lot of that. And sometimes when that goes badly, that can take Kansas State right out of games. I think it's going to be very interesting. I would expect, because of the physical nature of things, that there may be a lot of this game where he and Tyson Walker are guarding each other. Both New York City point guards. I mean, Tyson obviously is playing more of a scoring role for MSU this year, but you get my drift.
Yeah.
So that's going to be fascinating. Both guys that are coming home to play in this game at Madison Square Garden. It'll be interesting to see what impact, if any, the emotions around that have with either or both of them. I don't know if they know each other. Given their age, it wouldn't surprise me if they do, because they're about the same age. But or at least are familiar with each other. But this kid's very, very good. I don't mean to denigrate him at all. He's an outstanding player, but you should not be surprised if you see him with some head scratching moments in the game against MSU, because that's kind of what he is.
Do teams exploit the 5'8" nature of him? I mean, he's smaller than Steven Izzo. Well, Tom Izzo too, probably. So I would think defensively, I mean, he's probably quick, and I mean, that's why he gets all those steals, obviously. But
very, very quick.
I would think, like, against Wisconsin, he'd be a huge problem because you could invert your guards and post him up.
I don't think you're going to see Michigan State do much of that, because that's just not something they do very much. Whether they've had those issues at times this season, I don't know. I've seen Kansas State a decent amount. I haven't seen them enough to really be able to answer that question. To me, I'm a big proponent of posting guards, of inversion stuff, if it's something you do. It's something you need to practice. Your guys need to be comfortable doing it. And let's be honest, most guards are not asked to do that. So if you were going to just game plan because, I've got a 6'3" guy that's being guarded by him, so who never posts up anybody, but I'm going to decide to do that in this game, I think that's probably a mistake, because you're asking a player to do something they don't normally do for a one-game situation. That's not ideal to me.
Right.
So I wouldn't expect Michigan State to do a lot of that. I would you look at Kansas State's season, and you would assume they haven't been made to pay a price very often.
Yeah, sure. So next would be Desi Sills, 6'2" senior. He's been on the bench. He's been a starter. Recently, he's been more of a starter. He's averaging a little under 9 points a game on 45, 22, and 76 shooting, and is a guy who gets the line a lot. He's one of 3 players who has over 100 free throw attempts in the season.
Yeah, this is a guy that you're going to play to attack, as opposed to, we got to worry about him as a threat on the arc. He's just not been a good shooter, but he definitely gets himself to the line and has a high degree of activity in going off the dribble. So that's the concern that he presents for you there.
Next would be Cam Carter, 6'3" sophomore, averaging 6.4 points a game on 37, 32, and 71 shooting. He started his career at Mississippi State before transferring into K-State.
Yeah, playing a support role, but he's been a consistent starter all year. They like him defensively. He's contributed a little bit offensively, but again, one of the cast of thousands of transfers that comprise this team.
Next is the previously mentioned Keyontae Johnson, 6'6", 220-pound senior, averaging 17.5 points a game and 7 rebounds a game, which both lead the team. He's shooting 51, 41, and 73. So he's a three-level scorer. And as you mentioned, he had recently played for Florida.
Yeah, it's a great story in terms of his being able to come back from that, because this was, and maybe this goes back a little further than most people's memories go these days, but he had that incident on the court with, he had a heart issue during a game. And it was right in the early stages of playing after COVID had hit. And so there was a lot of concern about, is this a function of his having had COVID? It got caught up in the whole, without going into the weeds too
politics.
deeply, the whole myocarditis issue, right?
Yep.
I remember there was that horrendous study that not even the study author was standing behind the conclusions that were drawn from it at a Penn State around the potential effect on athletes' hearts, even if they had a mild case of COVID. Well, a lot of that came out in the wash, in terms of how accurate that was, but this was early. still early-ish. And it was scary. It was obviously, it was much more scary for him,
Yeah.
but it was scary on a whole host of levels. You got a kid just collapsing in the middle, an otherwise healthy appearing kid just collapsing in the middle of a game. Well, he's come back all the way from that. And it's easy to say, well, he was a very talented player at Florida. So, of course, it's natural to assume he'd be good at Kansas State. None of that was preordained.
Right.
How he was going to come back from it, at what level he would play, all of that was an open question. The way it's worked out is Jerome Tang got the best transfer in the country. I think that's a fair statement to say about how good Keyontae Johnson's been. Very tough cover. He's a 3-level scoring threat. This kid is athletic. He's strong. He will play some 3 and some 4. He's been starting at the 4 lately. And so that does create a bit of a conundrum for Michigan State. And I wonder how they choose to deal with it. I'm not certain of this, but I wonder if they actually might start the game putting Joey Hauser on one of the non-shooters and maybe giving Jaden Akins or AJ Hogard first crack Keyontae Johnson. He doesn't seem to me to be an ideal. I think Joey could hang in there, but he doesn't seem to be an ideal matchup. Whereas I think Malik Hall, when he's in the game, I think is a choice to match up. But it creates, when he's at the 4, he creates some problems potentially for MSU. But look, it's an obvious statement. He's their best player, and he's one of the best players in the country. He's been great.
Finally, Naquan Tomlin. He's a 6'10", 210-pound junior, averaging 10.3 points a game and 5.8 rebounds a game. Shoots 50, 27, and 73. So he does shoot a couple threes a game on average, but, of course, I mentioned 27%. He's not hitting a whole lot of them.
Low efficiency, but, when a guy's taking that many shots, you just have to be conscious of it. Big addition from the portal because they needed someone who could hold that spot down. And he gives them a lot of what they need. He's not a tower of strength physically in there. So he's not a back you down in the post kind of guy, but he's long, he's athletic, he's active. And that's something they needed to add. And he's given Jerome Tang that.
So then move into the reserves. We'll start with David Nagesian, 6'9", 215-pound junior, played 2 years at Virginia Tech before transferring to K State. He's averaging 6.4 points a game on 69 and 44 and 48. So his 44, though, he's only shot 9 threes all season.
Very limited sample.
Grabs 3.7 rebounds a game and has been a starter. He's been one sort of rotating through with Desi Sills, I suppose, whether he's coming in or not. Yeah.
Exactly. And if they want to go big, he's your 4-man and Johnson can slide to the 3. And we will see that look at times from him. So, again, they've got they don't start a lot of size. Their starting lineup now is pretty small, actually, but they got a lot of size they play off the bench, and he's one of them. He's the top guy.
Speaking of size, next would be Ismail Massoud, 6'9", 225-pound junior. Mostly plays in perimeter, though. He averages 5 points a game on 38, 40, and 96 shooting. And so most of his shots, but he sounds kind of like Miles Dredd. 65% of his shots and attempts are threes, averaging about 15 minutes a game. He came in from Wake Forest.
Yeah, not quite as extreme as Miles Dredd, but
maybe like
in
Seth Lundy.
In that ballpark. There you go. He hit a huge shot late in that game against Kentucky. He just rose up from about 25 feet and drained it. But you look at the percentage, and he's one of their few guys that you can say unequivocally is a pure shooter. So despite his size, he's really a guy who makes most of his impact, at least offensively, on the perimeter. He's not a guy, again, not a post-up threat. He's not going to back you down much, but he can stretch the floor.
Next, more size is Abayomi Iola, 6'10", 220-pound junior. This is his fourth stop. He's been playing at Stetson, Arkansas, Hofstra, averaging 3.6 points a game and 3 rebounds a game in about 12 minutes, shooting 55% from the floor and 77% from the line.
Yeah, reasonably productive, deeper rotation guy, and it's more size. He's more of a center, and that's the role they'll use him in, kind of backing up Tomlin. But the 4 schools thing, it's just
how was that possible?
To
I
me.
guess I'm not. It's not clear to me. I thought once you transfer, is that because they just refined the transfer rules? You can only transfer once without sitting, or without being forced.
Yeah, you're exactly. And it's just yeah. I mean, you're going to see more of this. You're going to see more of it, where you got guys that are just moving on every year. And it's a funny thing too. It's like you look at this guy, for example. So where did he start?
Stetson.
Okay. Then he goes to Arkansas, right?
Yep.
So he transfers up.
And then back down.
Then he moves back down to Hofstra because he didn't play enough.
Yeah.
Had a good year at Hofstra. Enough. Now he moves back up to Kansas State. That's these kind of scenarios you're going to see. It's guys hopping around and trying to navigate that tension between, is my role big enough or is the stage big enough?
Right.
And there's going to be a lot more of this going on. But yeah, decent quality depth at the 5 is his role.
Yeah, and I suppose in some level you kind of go into the transfer portal, and we've talked about this before in the summer. There were a lot of guys, whether 400 or 500, who went into the transfer portal who never found a spot, and they just didn't end up anywhere. And that it's obviously a huge risk for losing your college, your academic career.
Yep.
And now obviously he's good enough to get somewhere, but maybe in some ways you may not have as much choice of where you end up, right? I mean, it's possible Kansas State was one of 1 or 2 Power 5 schools that was interested in him, and so he just had to end up there.
It is to your advantage, be you a high school player or a college player entering the portal, to be an early mover.
Yeah.
Unless you are exceptionally good and everybody wants you, and there's only so many guys who fit into those categories, it is to your advantage to take the first spot available that you feel good with. You should not screw around. Because it's kind of like the old, when you were a little kid, if you ever participated in cakewalks.
Yeah, right.
Where they keep taking a chair away every time the music stops. And it's really a lot easier than you think to get caught without a chair.
Finally, TK Green, 6'4" senior transfer from Stony Brook. And although he played at Manhattan, which is the school in New York, he averages 2.8 points a game on 44, 21, and 35 shooting in about 11 minutes.
Yeah, and he's just providing guards. I mean, obviously they start 3 guards, so that's really where they're getting their depth from. But this kid will take a couple turns and on the wing and kind of help hold the fort down.
Okay, well, we'll go to our 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing, in just a moment.
Yo, what up? It's your boy Ant Wright over on Big Ten Coast to Coast, along with Matt Lukens, covering everything you need to know with March Madness, but specifically everything Big Ten.
Yeah, if you've been looking for a college basketball podcast with a little Big Ten flavor, we are your guys this March. Come join the conversation with us.
Come through, come kick it. We'd love to have you.
The madness is here, so get in on the fun with the Big Bets on Campus podcast from Action Network, every round of the NCAA tournament. So check us out on the Big Bets on Campus podcast. Let's find some winners.
All right, the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing, as a reminder, is one of our sponsors that prints all the Final Fours on the schedule shirts and hoodies, which I guess if Michigan State makes the Final Four, we'll have to have a new version available where it is on the schedule. You can go to find that at finalfoursontheschedule.com/merchandise, or you can just go to nudgeprinting.com, and there you can get any one of the selection from Gabe and Brittany. They have, again, high quality Spartan apparel. They also have other schools available that are in the state of Michigan, all the directional schools, northern, eastern, western, central. And they also have Oakland, Detroit, Wayne State, Saginaw Valley State, Grand Valley State. So if you're someone who's looking for that gear where you're not able to find your school, they are a great option. You can get also all the vintage Michigan State stuff. They're one of the few licensed providers of the vintage stuff. Also the special things like Spartan Strong, they're involved in that. They're involved in things with like Tuck Coming. So you can check out their website at nudgeprinting.com. They also have a million really high quality 5-star reviews. So you can get all your gear that you need there at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off for listeners of this show if you enter Final Four as a coupon code at checkout. So make sure you go over there. You will be glad you did. I know I enjoy all my Nudge stuff. I know Rod's got a bunch of Nudge stuff too, and it's just fantastic stuff. All right, so let's get into the keys to the game. Number one, connected. Michigan State was probably the most connected they've been this season in the first two games, first two rounds against USC and then also Marquette. So again, they were at this point of the season where you have to be solid defensively every time you go out on the court. And so there's another example where they have to do it.
And a different kind of challenge. Marquette was one similarity is that both of these teams, Marquette and Kansas State, have had a lot of success inside the arc, but they did it in different ways. Marquette was much more about cutting and ball screens and finding guys with quick ball movement in the inside the arc to generate good shot opportunities. Kansas State is a little, and it's not saying they can't do those things, but they're a little more of square you up and attack the rim kind of team. They've got guys very athletic that can do that. And consequently, they also get to the foul line a lot. So Michigan State is going to once again have to be really good in terms of its primary on-ball defense. And then they're going to need to be good where Izzo has talked about they've really made improvement that was demonstrated over the previous weekend in terms of their gap responsibilities.
Right.
So that means help. The ability of guys to be in position where they can easily close the gap if the ball handler's guy, primary defender, gets beat to some extent. And you saw Michigan State execute that really, really well in those two games. They did it against USC and really bottled up Boogie Ellis and Drew Peterson. And then you saw it repeatedly against Marquette, where they didn't let Marquette create those kind of easy scoring opportunities. It's most of the time when a guy seemed like he had a path to bucket, it got shut down. And that's going to be even more important in this game, I think, just because of the way Kansas State tends to play with their aggression and looking to get to the rim, either to score or to create fouls.
And for those listeners who are kind of new to the show or just found it, when you're talking about gap protection, we're talking about generally like your 4 or your 5 man. So you're the bigger, the backcourt, right? That is
frequently, yeah.
That is coming,
frequently,
that is blocking the lane
guys
to
under
the
rim.
path to the basket, right? Yep. That's when somebody gets around the initial defender, there's not an easy path and you have to pass it up to, I guess ideally you're passing it to the guy who's blocking the gap was covering because they would theoretically have an opener, more open shot.
Yeah, it's Michigan State's standard defensive approach is, because any defense is going to have gaps in it, but gap responsibility, the ability to close gaps, to close space, and provide help without taking yourself totally out of position in terms of your man, because that doesn't do anybody any good. If you seal one guy off, but you leave your man to the extent that they're available for an easy jump off, well, that doesn't solve anything, right?
Yeah.
So it's walking a line, and when you hear them talk about connectivity, being connected, that's really, in a very general way, what they're talking about is the ability of guys. Another cliche we'll hear used to describe it is that the defense is on a string, which means when you're pulling one end, the other ends are moving in concert with it. and so nobody's totally out of position, yet they're available to provide help when needed. That's the essence of it. And it's something that MSU has struggled with at times this year, at least to find any consistency with it. But I thought they were generally very good. They weren't 100% in both games. They had some occasional problems with ball screen coverage where USC and Marquette were able to make them pay. But for the most part, given particularly Marquette, given how ball screen heavy those teams are, for the most part, Michigan State, I thought, did a really good job in that area. And they're going to need to show up again.
All right, the second key to the game, the three ball. Michigan State has to start hitting some threes to win, right? I mean, they had to win, hit them to beat USC. Well, not really. They they absolutely had to beat them against Marquette, and not really. I mean, the last two games, Michigan State has, I believe, 7 for 30 from three. The previous 5 games are 49 for 80. I mean, so there's a huge change, in efficiency there. At some point, I guess you look at it and say, well, they're going to start hitting them, and when is that going to happen? And the other thing is, can you survive another game where you don't hit them?
Well, it kind of reminds me of the old saw about the stock market that, the stock market can stay irrational just long enough to break you. and you look at the season numbers, the seasonal averages, and you would say, well, Michigan State's overdue to have a great shooting game. But that's not a guarantee that it happens.
Right.
And particularly Kansas State has proven to be very good against the threes, which was not the case with USC or with Marquette. And so what those teams did is they really sold out. And I thought, and they still weren't able to stop Michigan State from getting a decent amount of really good looks, but they missed them.
Yeah.
But even so, they kept the attempts down because of the way they defended. Kansas State has been able to do that a little more naturally as a regular part of what they do. And again, the word that comes to my mind when I watch Kansas State, aggression. They are very aggressive on the perimeter. They create a decent amount of steals, and they're able to limit high quality looks by opponents. All that said, if Michigan State plays their game, meaning they're getting the ball into the teeth of the defense, forcing it to distort, and then they're spraying the ball out, they're moving the ball well, Michigan State will get good looks. Can they hit them? It's hard to imagine that they could go 3 games without the 3 being a major part of what they do and win them all, but it's that kind of year. The other thing is, too, can Michigan State adjust the way they did in these first 2 games where those teams were pressing up, trying to take the 3 away? Michigan State's response largely was, okay, fine, we're going to go to the rim. And I thought Michigan State had its 2 best games of the season in terms of that, in terms of guards looking to attack. You saw Tyson Walker do it, you saw AJ Hoggard do it, and you certainly saw Jaden Akins do it. That will be imperative here as well.
That brings us to our third key to the game, attack. So, what can they do?
Yeah.
And I think because Michigan State is an excellent free throw shooting team, I don't even think we even really touched upon how well they did in the game against Marquette, but
it was a big part of that.
21 to 23 or something like that. They were fantastic.
Yeah. Yep. It was huge. And especially coming off an unusually bad game against USC, it was nice to see. And that goes along with what I was just saying. MSU has to be in an attack. Kansas State is going to play with an attacking mindset. That's who they are. Michigan State's got to match that. And if Kansas State is going to take the deep shot away, all right, you got to make them pay for it. How do you do that? You go off the dribble, and you finish plays. Now, the good news is Kansas State is not a great rim protection team. So it's not like the USC game, let's say, where you were a little bit conscious of Morgan lurking back there. And is he gonna erase some shots when we think we've blown past somebody and root rim? Kansas State doesn't have that kind of team. So if you can get past that perimeter, that first line, there are probably going to be opportunities to score there.
Well, speaking of that first line, when you get back to the back line, that's a potential key to the game, as well as the number 4 key is offensive boards. Michigan State did okay, 30%, which is actually pretty good, 30% offensive rebounding against Marquette, but really converted for a lot of those for points. I think it was 15 second chance points, right?
That's the key. They were productive with the opportunities they had. And again, we're talking about games that are supposed to be very competitive. This is not a game where you're going in as a 15-point favorite or a 15-point underdog.
Right.
I think the last line I saw was Michigan State by 2.
Yeah.
In Vegas, which is a little different than the Ken Palm line. It's supposed to be close. If it's a 1-possession game, how much might an extra 4 or 6 points on second chances mean? It could be huge. So I'm not talking about Michigan State going in and dominating the game on the offensive glass, although that would be a welcome sight too. I am talking about them possibly stealing just a few buckets here and there. That can be a difference maker. And again, we always talk about this in conjunction with turnovers. It's kind of the basketball equivalent of special teams in some ways. This is a game that potentially sets up very, very well for Michigan State, because Kansas State, although they'll force a decent amount of turnovers, they just commit a ton of them themselves. So going in, you would think, if you're Michigan State, hey, that's an area where we probably got a little bit of an advantage. And then if you can duplicate that by carving out a little bit of an advantage on the glass as well, hey, maybe you're getting, an extra 6 or 7 chances to score. That's big. In a game that's supposed to be tight, that's really big.
Well, certainly. And, you watch that Marquette game, and the biggest play of that game, arguably, is that offensive rebound by Malik Hall. Then
100%.
They get a call timeout, and then right after that, Walker hits a 2 jumper, and 7 points, game over.
Yep, exactly. It was. I agree with you. In terms of time and situation, it was the biggest play of the game, because if they miss it and Marquette grabs the rebound, well, you've got whatever it was, like a minute and change left.
2-possession game.
And they're only down 5, right? Instead, Michigan State is able to bleed the clock down another 15 seconds or so and cap it off with a jumper from Walker, where he just squared his guy up and did what we've seen him do 100 times, use his speed and handle to create enough space to get a good look, and he drained it, and that was ball game. I mean, it was the Malik Hall giving them that second chance was huge. So you're looking, and we said the same thing in that Marquette game. It doesn't have to be total domination, and it wasn't. But are you able to carve out that little bit of an advantage? And it's the same dynamic here.
And finally, the 5th key to the game, cohesion. So the one thing that Michigan State has going for them is they're an old team in the sense that, their guards and, well, even Malik Hall, right? They've got a lot of experience all over the court. Joey, Hall, Walker, and Hogard. Only Akins is the baby, right? Is a sophomore, but they don't really have any freshmen they rely on in this game. So, and they've been playing together for at least a year or two.
That's the big difference, because Kansas State has guys who have a lot of experience playing, but they don't come close to matching Michigan State's connected, cohesive, cumulative experience playing with each other.
Right.
There is a difference there. Now, will that go up? I mean, Kansas State has got a full year under its belt playing together, so it's not as if this is November. But I would submit, when you see a team that has the turnover issues they do, has the defensive rebounding issues that they do, those can be signs of a team that is still not really as connected as you'd want to be. And I don't mean emotionally. I just mean in terms of really knowing each other's games inside out. Michigan State had moments down this. Well, I think the whole stretch run yesterday, the big difference between Michigan State and Marquette is one team is very experienced and has played together a lot, and the other team couldn't match that.
Yeah.
Marquette's very young, and it showed. I felt.
Yeah, well, I think
I
on
felt
both
it
ends,
showed up.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Kansas State, it's a little different. They got a lot of juniors and seniors, so these guys have a lot of basketball under their belts, but they don't have as much basketball playing together as Michigan State has. So this is a real contrast. You are talking about a Kansas State team that has pretty much exclusively been built through the portal. Like even the guys that they've got back, like Nowell, he was a portal guy. It was just a year earlier.
Yeah, right.
Michigan State has 2 guys that they brought in via transfer. One of them is in his 4th year in the program, counting the redshirt year he had to take, and the other is in his 2nd. So it's a little different thing. And we will see if that makes any difference. I'm not suggesting that that's the most important factor in this game. That's why it's number 5. It's not number 1. But it is something that occurs to me. I give full credit to Kansas State because they had no other option for this season but to build it this way. And they did. And they obviously made good choices in terms of who they opted to add. And they've done a great job of integrating all those guys together and forging a cohesive group. But we are now at the Sweet 16 stage. And from here on out, it's small differences that matter. You are no longer in a phase where there should be huge gaps between teams. It is the small things that can make it between winning or losing. And one of those, in my opinion, could be a stretch run of a closely contested, tight game is one team in an advantageous position because they know each other better and they've played more together. I think we saw it in the last game with Michigan State. Will we see it again here? Remains to be seen.
I feel like when the NC tournament, there's that when you turn from one weekend to the next, the teams look different in the sense that however you're playing in that Thursday, Friday, Thursday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday, you look different in the next weekend. Like if you were red hot, it's not unusual to see a team come in and they just suddenly can't hit anything, or vice versa, right? And so
sure.
The question, it's going to be, I think for Michigan State, the big questions are, for one thing, the obvious thing is, can they hit the outside shot now? They have a chance to step back, practice, whatever, and sort of get more comfortable. And for whatever reason, they'll be shooting better. I expect that they will shoot at least average, not a little better. That's just my guess. And then, is AJ going to remain locked in like he was the first 2 games?
Yeah.
Because I tend to think that he's turned a corner, and that at least with this tournament, I don't think he'll be able to feel casual because again, Michigan State's not a favorite in any of these games that they'll be playing unless they run into Florida Atlantic probably. So,
well, they're actually the Vegas favorite in this one,
right?
At least right now.
But I guess by seeding standpoint, they're not. So I think most people not favoring them.
Oh, they'll find plenty of reason to believe that everybody's doubting them.
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, right. And then I guess the other question is too, Mahdi and Carson Cooper and Kohler to a lesser extent. He didn't really play a big role in either game in the first weekend here, and maybe will in the second. We'll see. But can those two maintain that defensive intensity and that, as you mentioned, connectedness and the ability to, in this sense, not play the pick and roll as much, but they're going to be relied upon to help with that gap defense for sure to protect the rim.
Yeah, and all of those are good points, and those are all additional things worth watching. I think of that group, the one that's most important to me by a long shot, and really would be a 6th key if we had one, is obviously AJ Hogard.
Right, sure.
I mean, it just so much it turns on where he's at. And yeah, you'd hope that the signs are there that he's finally turned the corner, that for as long as this year continues, that's not a question. But I think it has to be posed at least as a key because we've seen reversion in the wrong direction often enough at least for the short term. And we're at a point in the year where short term can mean you're done.
Right.
So
or like
he's
10
got to
minutes.
be there.
You can't fog out for
Yep.
10 minutes. Yeah.
10 bad minutes, and that can be it. So he's got to be locked in, and you're not at a point yet, and I probably will never get to this point where I make the assumptions that I've made about other guys. I never worried about Cassius Winston in that way. He might have an occasional bad game, but it wasn't going to be for those reasons.
Yeah, right.
Mateen Cleaves, I never worried about it. Kalen Lucas. I mean, you can go on and on. This has been different. And, you get the trust level that you earn. And I think Izzo trusts him. But, for those of us who are outside that locker room, I think the sensible position is you're going moment to moment. And I wish it wasn't the case, but that's, until AJ puts enough under his belt that you could say, okay, I no longer worry about it. You have to react that way.
Oh, sure.
And at different points this season, it felt like, well, maybe we were there, but then we saw it go the other direction for a while. So it's crucial. It's crucial in every game. It almost goes without saying. AJ Hogarth's got to deliver. He doesn't have to be the best player on the floor necessarily, but he has to be good.
Right. Well, and then, as far as bulletin board material, I don't know. You probably saw the ESPN, how they reseeded the Sweet 16. I found it so amusing. I'm just going to go through it because I think it's really I think it's humorous. So you've got Alabama number 1. Okay. Houston 2, UCLA 3, Texas 4, UConn 5, Tennessee 6, Gonzaga 7, Kansas State 8, Xavier 9, Creighton 10, Arkansas 11, San Diego State 12, Miami 13, and I just want to point out this is this year's Sweet 16. Michigan State 14th, Princeton 15th, and Florida Atlantic 16th.
Okay. First of all, there is no, and hats off to Princeton for what they've done. There's no world where they're a better team than Florida Atlantic. But not by seed, not by eye test, not by record, not by metrics, nothing.
Their mascot is far more terrifying than an owl, right? I'd take a tiger over an owl.
Yeah. Okay. Start right there. Look, whatever. I mean, here's the thing that I find funny. So Michigan State has played a 10 seed from a Power 5 conference, USC. Not a great team, but certainly a team that I think you'd say, okay, it's a lot better opposition in the first round than most of those teams you just listed faced, because most of them were like top 3 or 4 seeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're playing lesser opponents in the first round. And then Michigan State took out the number 2 seed in their region, who was the pick du jour of everybody to get at least to the Elite 8. And they get no credit from that. And by the way, beat them by 9. They've won these 2 games by an average of 9.5 points. So you could say, well, they pulled away in both. It wasn't like they hammered those teams, and I don't disagree. But, we put so much emphasis on scoring margin. They're winning by almost double digits in the first 2 games. They haven't had to go down to the wire and hit a jumper with 2 seconds left to win a ball game, So I wonder why they don't get more of a bump. And then look, you add in the other factor here, which is, and it's not decisive, but if you are not factoring it in, you're not paying enough attention. You have a first-year head coach who has done a great job and knows what it's like to be part of a winning program. I'm not taking anything away from Jerome Tang. He gets a little slogany for taste. And I thought the way he handled the aftermath of their Kentucky win, they asked something and he went on a rant about how tradition doesn't mean anything necessarily. All the old guys that won things at Kentucky aren't walking through that door. You got to have dudes, and Kansas State had more dudes.
Keep chopping.
Okay. Yeah, I know. And And I'll admit your bias can take that stuff from cute to,
Yep.
dumb, depending upon where you're standing. But you're still talking about a guy who's in his first year. He's never been through this. This is all new against a guy who just keeps, you see these numbers that get published after these wins at Tom Izzo's career. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what he's done. And so in a situation like this, that probably should also factor in to how you're evaluating the team. It doesn't mean that you necessarily make Michigan State a favorite versus anybody, but it should probably garner them a little more respect than that. Now, I will say, I've also seen some national people saying basically what I just said, which is, hey, Tom Izzo in the second weekend, and with what he's aligned against, you'd be foolish to bet against him. I've seen that take out there. I don't think they're being completely overlooked as a legitimate threat to get through this weekend. So I can't say in all fairness, they've just been, hammered with disrespect. But if you're reading this as they're not getting quite what the program at least should be due, I don't think that's an unfair read. One thing that I hesitate to mention, it is interesting though, we talked after the last, and this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but we talked after the last game about Tom Izzo's record in the second game of a weekend, 24-7 now,
right?
Which is just stunning.
Pretty good.
Potentially, he'd be going up in the second game of this weekend if they can get there. And if the other side holds to seed, he'd be going up against one of the handful of guys who have actually beaten him in that scenario. And it's funny to say it about Rick Barnes, because Rick Barnes is the perception of him generally is that he's a March choker.
Mm-hmm.
That was largely built up during time at Texas, but he does not have a great NCAA tournament record, but he did beat Michigan State in an Elite Eight game in 2003 when he was at Texas. It was TJ Ford's team that beat MSU that year, but that was a really good Texas team. He's got a really good Tennessee team too, but they're down a point guard, and that's a problem. Now, they may be able to overcome it because they've got enough horses. I think they could, but anyway, just a little preview if Michigan State does manage to get to that game, and that's who's standing there. I'd still bet on Izzo's track record, but that is one of the few who can lay claim to having taken him out in the second game of the weekend.
We'll be back after the game on Thursday. I want to remind you to, again, if you've not yet subscribed to the show, please do so. This podcast is top 50 in America for all basketball podcasts. That includes professional and college. So, thanks so much to you guys for listening and sharing. You're obviously, tuning in all the time. We really appreciate it. It helps our ego, I guess, not just yelling into the ether all by ourselves. So it's nice to have everyone support the show. And if you want to support the show and what we're doing here, please head on over to our website at tffinots.com/support. You can find ways of doing one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring monthly basis through Patreon that helps support us, all the extra content we provide and all the things we do here. So I guess until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.
March Madness is here, and the Sports Gambling Podcast has you covered. We've got daily shows from Las Vegas where we're picking every game against the spread, helping you dominate your bracket. Plus, we got our free March Madness bankroll contest where you can win $1,000 in cash and prizes. Best part is all of our picks and contests are completely free. So subscribe to the Sports Gambling Podcast, and don't forget to let it ride.